Charles I was born on November 19, 1600, in Dunfermline, Scotland. He was the second son of James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, and Anne of Denmark. Charles was born into a royal family, and his upbringing was marked by the political and religious tensions of the time. He was educated at home by private tutors and later attended St. James's Palace in London. Charles was a sickly child, wore braces on his ankles and had a stutter which remained with him into adulthood. Charles became King of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1625, following the death of his father, James I. He was crowned at Westminster Abbey in London on February 2, 1626. At the time of his ascension to the throne, Charles was not popular with the English people, who viewed him as an inexperienced and frivolous young man. Charles married the 15-year-old Henrietta Maria of France on June 13, 1625, in Canterbury Cathedral. Henrietta was the daughter of King Henry IV of France and Marie de' Medici, and was known for her Catholic faith and strong personality. The couple had 9 children together, 5 of which survived, including 2 sons who would later become kings of England, Charles II and James II. Charles was a staunch believer in the divine right of kings, a political theory that held that monarchs were appointed by God and were answerable only to God. Charles believed that his power came directly from God and that he did not have to answer to his subjects or parliament. Charles faced financial difficulties throughout his reign, and was often at odds with Parliament over money. Parliament was responsible for approving taxes, but Charles believed that he had the right to collect taxes without Parliament's approval. This led to repeated conflicts between Charles and Parliament, and was one of the factors that contributed to the outbreak of the English Civil War. In 1629, Charles dissolved Parliament and ruled without one for 11 years, a period known as the personal rule. During this time, Charles ruled through his own council, which was made up of his advisors and courtiers. Charles's rule during this period was marked by a number of controversial policies, including his efforts to promote Anglican traditions and his support for unpopular ministers. Charles was an avid art collector and patron of the arts, and commissioned many famous works during his reign. He was particularly interested in the works of the Flemish painter Peter Paul Rubens, and commissioned a number of paintings and tapestries from him. Charles was also known for his collection of Italian art, which included works by Titian, Veronese, and Raphael. Charles's religious policies were controversial, and he was criticized by Puritans for his support of Anglican traditions. Charles was a devout Anglican, and believed that the Church of England should be the only legal church in England. He was opposed to the Puritan movement, which sought to reform the church and promote a more austere form of worship. In 1637, Charles attempted to impose a new prayer book on the Scottish Presbyterian Church, which led to the outbreak of the Bishops' Wars. The Scottish Covenanters, who were opposed to the prayer book and the Anglican Church, rose up against Charles's forces and defeated them in a series of battles. The wars ended in 1640 with the signing of the Treaty of Ripon, which gave Scotland a say in English politics. In 1642, Charles's dispute with Parliament over taxes and his religious policies led to the outbreak of the English Civil War. The war pitted Charles's royalist forces against Parliament's Roundhead forces, led by Oliver Cromwell. The Roundheads against the Cavaliers. The war was marked by a number of bloody battles, and lasted until 1652, when the Royalists were finally defeated. Charles was initially successful in the English Civil War, winning a number of important battles, or holding a stalemate, including the Battle of Edgehill in 1642 and the Battle of Adwalton Moor in 1643. However, the tide of the war turned against him in 1644, when his forces were defeated at the Battle of Marston Moor by the combined forces of Parliament and the Scottish Covenanters. In 1645, Charles was defeated again at the Battle of Naseby, which was a decisive victory for Parliament. Charles was forced to flee and went into hiding, while Parliament's forces continued to make gains. The war continued for several more years, but by 1648, Parliament had gained the upper hand and was close to victory. In 1648, Charles made a desperate attempt to regain his throne by raising a new army in Scotland. However, his plan was foiled when the Scottish army was defeated by Cromwell's forces at the Battle of Preston. Charles was captured and brought to London, where he was put on trial for high treason. The trial of Charles I was a landmark event in English history, as it was the first time that a monarch had been tried and executed by his own people. The trial began on January 20, 1649, and lasted for several days. Charles was charged with treason against his own people, and was found guilty by a majority vote of the court. On January 30, 1649, Charles was executed by beheading outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, London. His execution was a shock to many people in England and Europe, as it was seen as a violation of the divine right of kings and the sanctity of monarchy. Following Charles's execution, England became a republic known as the Commonwealth of England. Oliver Cromwell was appointed as Lord Protector and ruled as a military dictator until his death in 1658. Cromwell's rule was marked by religious toleration and economic growth, but was also marked by repression and censorship. In 1660, following the collapse of the Commonwealth, Charles's son, also named Charles, was restored to the throne as King Charles II. This event is known as the Restoration, and marked the return of the monarchy to England. Charles I's reign and execution had a profound impact on English history and politics. His belief in the divine right of kings and his conflict with Parliament helped to establish the principle of parliamentary sovereignty in England. His execution also served as a reminder of the limits of royal power and the importance of individual rights. Charles I was a complex and controversial figure, whose reign was marked by conflict, religious strife, and political turmoil. His devotion to the Anglican Church and his belief in the divine right of kings placed him at odds with many of his subjects, and ultimately led to his downfall. Despite his controversial legacy, Charles I is remembered as a patron of the arts and a collector of fine art and literature. His collection of paintings and tapestries, which included works by Rubens, Titian, and Raphael, was one of the finest in Europe. His love of literature also inspired him to become a patron of poets and playwrights, including Ben Jonson and William Shakespeare.